Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Thursday the 10th of May 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political news today. And to start off with, the UK and EU allies are pushing to save the Iran nuclear deal. Now, this has been making international news, particularly over the last few hours. And indeed, it's come straight through onto the UK agenda as well, as President Trump, decided and made the announcement that the US was going to pull out of the nuclear Iran deal. It was 2015 that it was created, and what it did was basically curb Iran's nuclear activities in return for lifting of UN, US and EU sanctions. Now, Britain and European allies have drew up plans last night, or measures, I should say, to counter the impact of US sanctions on companies doing business with Iran, because US will obviously be putting sanctions back on Iran through pulling out of the nuclear deal. Britain also saying, through the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, has no intention of walking away from the Iran deal. And Mr. Johnson also urged the US President not to block other nations from making the nuclear agreement work. That will be difficult, however, and indeed some of the reports coming through from the Iranian leadership as well, indicating that without the US it's going to be difficult to find a way for the nuclear agreement to actually work in practicality, and particularly in the context of those sanctions which we put back reportedly onto Iran by the US. Other signatories to the deal are the UK, France, China, Russia and Germany. So far, all of those parties have said that they are still very much committed to the Iran nuclear deal. Again, this is developing stories, so we don't know quite yet what's going to be the political implications of this, but it's certainly in the balance at the moment. There's one other aspect to this, which is due to the stability of the Middle East as a whole, and that's what's happening with regards to Israel and Iran and the tensions which seem to, as reports indicate, be rising over the last few hours. Israeli Defense Force announced it had been fired upon with Iranian rockets yesterday in the Golan Heights. That's come through on the international news feeds as well. So this is very, very much an international live news story, and we'll be developing, no doubt, in the next few hours and next few days as well. Next up, back to the Commons. Leveson 2 defeated. Now, Ed Miliband, you might be seeing on social media, has had a few videos of him looking quite irate in the House of Commons yesterday. That's because stricter press regulation and triggering Part 2 of the Leveson inquiry was defeated, or followed the two amendments which would have put them in action, were defeated in the House of Commons very narrowly yesterday. Ed Miliband, in particular, proposed amendments to the Data Protection Bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment, which would trigger, his amendment would trigger the second inquiry into press standards and conduct, which was called Leveson 2, after the first Leveson inquiry finished. Labour's Deputy Leader Tom Watson also did a second amendment to impose higher financial penalties on news organisations which did not join the state-sanctioned regulator. That, however, didn't go to a vote. But the one which did, which was Ed Miliband's amendment over Leveson 2, was very close. In fact, by a margin of just 9 votes was the actual amendment defeated. What does this mean? Well, it could indicate that Leveson 2 has been completely defeated. That's not entirely true. What could happen is when the Data Protection Bill goes to the Lords could decide that the amendment which Ed Miliband proposed, or something similar to do with Leveson 2, could be tagged back on. So if the Lords decide that an amendment will be put forward, and if it's voted on, and indeed approved by the Lords, it will be sent back to the Commons for another vote and indeed another debate. So it's not all over yet. Reports indicating that there is some possibility that there will be some movement by those who are really pushing for it to try and get the Lords to tag on the amendment and send it back to the Commons. But at the moment, that is still pretty uncertain. Next up, and indeed finally, the back towards Brexit, which indeed has been pretty much leading the week as political agenda towards, particularly in the concern of the customs union. And there appears to be another alternative solution in regards to how Brexit and the customs union and the Irish border can be resolved. This is from Brexiteers as well. These reports coming through from The Sun and indeed the BBC as well. Brexiters including Nick Timothy, who's a former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Theresa May, and allies of Michael Gove, who's of course the Environment Secretary now, are calling for the Prime Minister to extend the transition period. So that's obviously been after leaving the European Union, but before this sort of buffer period before the real implementation of leaving the European Union takes place, to be extended. And the reason it's to be extended is to allow the technology of maximum facilitation, that customs arrangement which is being put forward by Brexiteers, in order for that technology to be developed so that it works. Now, one of the key concerns about maximum facilitation as an option for the customs agreement is that the technology is not quite there, it's not practical, and it could be damaging to the economy. It's about trusted traders, so people who pre-registered and are trusted traders will be able to pass through the land border between the UK and the EU, which is on Ireland, quite seamlessly. But according to BuzzFeed, cabinet ministers have also been briefed that the maximum facilitation plan, even if the technology is in place and does work, would leave the British economy worse off by 1.8% in the long run and would have a negative impact on nearly 150,000 British firms as well. So still a lot of debate there, but there's some movement, it seems, by Brexiteers to extend the transition period, which is very, very unusual for Brexiteers to be trying to extend leaving the European Union any longer in order to make this custom arrangement work. That's pretty much it for today. You're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. But from me and all the team here at Core London, have a fantastic start to your Thursday.